Hi guys. Okay, so the layout's got a decent baseboard and we're ready for the next step, the track. Obviously this layout will have a simple strip of track, and for this I'm using FlexiTrack. The idea for this is that I use a shuttle unit, so it's hand-free operation, and I can sit back and watch it whilst I eat my Christmas dinner. So I bought this unit on eBay. It was only around £12 or something like that, so my confidence isn't exactly 100%, but we'll see how it goes. It seems quite simple to use. It's basically one knob that you turn for longer intervals at the ends. It actually comes with 3 pages of instructions. I mean, they are all in capitals, but still, £12. The diagram shows how I'll need to not only wire up the unit, but also how to cut the track sections up, as the ends need isolated zones. The first thing I'll do is use the Dremel to cut down the track to fit the board. I'll give it a dry run on where it'll be laid on the scene. I want to sort out the isolated sections first, and the instructions say to mark out the length of your longest train. Keep an eye on that. I moved the train to the off-scene area and marked it out on the cork. The Dremel was then used to slice one rail. These 2 rails will then be connected again with a nylon insulating rail joiner. I needed to remove one sleeper and its connected webbing from below this joint to allow for the rail joiner to fit. The Dremel is also good at filing the ends of the freshly cut rail back to a clean finish. It is important for not only good running but also for the rail joiner to actually slide on. The rail joiner was then added on, and the end rail pushed up against it so that the gap is minimal. The whole section of the track only needs 2 wires added, and I decided to solder them on from below. Equipping the Dremel with a drill piece slightly larger than the wire, I now drill 2 holes into the baseboard and slot the wires through. The kit comes with 2 resistors, and these connect the main rail to the 2 isolated pieces. It's important to fit these the correct way round for it to work as intended. I'm bending them up like this as they're pretty long. These can now be soldered to the 2 rails. I've cut a slit in the cork and sat the resistor in there, which will help when it comes to adding the ballast. That's it for soldering, and I move on to wiring it up. So the unit only needs 6 wires, 2 to the rail, 2 to the power output on the controller, and 2 to the accessory output on the controller. These are all screwed on, so I'm adding short pieces of wire at the moment to test that it all runs, and when I know it all works fine, I'll put longer wires in and fit it all below the board. To be fair, the kit comes with 6 pieces of wire, which is something a lot of more expensive kits wouldn't do. It's all wired up and on. Let's give it a test run to see if it doesn't launch off the end or something. Well, it moves, but it hasn't gone all the way to the end, and this is why. When the instructions said to make the isolated sections the length of your longest train, it didn't mean train, it meant engine. On a positive note, it does go back again. It's a quick fix to sort the stopping point though. I just need to move the isolation point further to the left. But just keep note of this if you choose to do this yourself. The track works perfectly now, so I'll glue it down. For this I usually use Copydex, purely because it's a rubber glue so you get minimal vibration noise as the trains run. Because the glue doesn't dry instantly, I need to find a way of holding the FlexiTrack in position, and I've opted for drawing pins. I use this method on Corish and it actually works really well with FlexiTrack. You don't need a huge amount, just on the areas where there'll be stress, such as the corners. The glue's dried, the drawing pins are removed, and the rails wiped clean. So I'll now test the track again to fault check before going forward. It's looking good and the train stops where I originally intended, which I like. I can now begin to form the basic landscape, and for this, I started with a slab of polystyrene. This may be the last time I use polystyrene as it's so messy to cut with a knife, and I currently don't have a working hot cutter. Before I form the terrain on the left, I need to modify the MS model's footbridge, as it will be sitting on a slight angle. I marked the bridge with a pen and ruler where I want to cut it, and then cracked on with a Dremel fitted with a cutting disc. Because this was a resin print, I'm pretty sure it's not that healthy to breathe in the dust, so I've got the extractor fan on the spray booth on. To get a clean edge, I'm sanding down a freshly cut end on some heavy grade sandpaper. And placing it back on the layout, you can see how the new end fits a lot better with the side of the layout. With that done, I can now continue to add the landscape. PVA works fine for this sort of job, as it doesn't attack the foam, so that's good. I decided to stop with the polystyrene and instead chose some random foam blocks that came as packaging a while back. I think it's quite important to not always go all guns blazing and make huge steep embankments everywhere, so on the front edge here I'm only using very subtle change of levels. Standing at track level, it's only about waist height. The riverbank is also glued on. I wondered how to go about the platform area, and in the end I decided that another layer of cork would do, as this is a decent depth for narrow gauge platforms, as well as being a large piece so the whole area is nicely levelled. The cork needs to be held down as it dries or you get bubbles in the surface, so I'll leave it overnight with heavy books on it. The next day, and the rest of the landscape can go on, I ditched the old kitchen knife for more refined and sharp knife blade. Using this out of the knife's body makes it a bit easier to get into the fiddly little corners. I have also come to the decision that this type of foam is much better than polystyrene. I shall embrace my inner hoarder during the Christmas period and gather much of this stuff as I can for future projects. Again, PVA works really well to hold this foam down onto the cork. The final piece to go on needed to be cut to fit around the bridge. It's worth popping the bridge into its final place to fine tune the position of the foam before it sets in place for the rest of time. There we go, looks about right. Before I start adding the top coat on the foam areas, I wanted to add the front fascia. I originally was going to use ply for this, but as the laser cutter's waiting for a replacement belt to arrive, I looked at alternatives, and I found the offcuts of Foamex from the Corish build a few weeks back. I flipped the layout around 180 degrees and held the offcut up to the front of the layout, and followed the new contour of the edge. This is then cut out with a few passes of a knife, and then glued onto the side of the frame with a hot glue gun. This piece wasn't actually long enough for the whole side, which annoyed me more than it should have. So, I finished it off with a couple of smaller bits. The gaps between these will be filled before painting, so you shouldn't really see it. I'll know it's there though. With all these pieces in place, I made a final pass with a knife to bring a bit of finesse to the join between the Foamex and the layout. Now if you saw my mini-series on the Audrey challenge in the summer, then you would have seen me use this stuff. It's a modelling compound, essentially mashed up paper and filler or something like that. It can get messy, so I'll quickly mask off the track to reduce the risk of making a hash of it. The modelling compound needs to be prepped for use, so I'll use an old takeaway tub. Would have been a curry, probably a pathia, chicken. The compound is tipped in, carefully as it gets everywhere. I added a few blobs of black paint, and this dulls down the intense white finish you get if you use it neat. And finally, a good amount of water. The mixture is now, well, mixed. You need to judge it for consistency, and add more water where needed. I've employed an assistant for this job. The beauty of child labour in my eyes is that they're not only cheap, but their little hands can get into the smaller gaps between the board and fascia. Since my polystyrene upset, I've let her tackle that bank and I'll do the rest. This stuff is applied bit by bit, and it needs to be worked into the layout so it sticks. I find that it dries really quickly, so you may need to add water as you go. So at this point, all of the new scenery has now been covered, and the assistant directed me to try and smooth the finish out. Well, my side is clearly inferior to the quality of hers, and I'd assume that's to do with her skin being smooth and full of life, whereas mine is tired and sad. These are great models, but the glaring issue here on the coach is that somehow Pico has produced it way over scale, and it really shows. But as this isn't a prototype build, I'm happy to ignore that so I can use it. All I want to do with these two is weather the finish a little bit. I've got a colour, it's called Kelly Green, and I've worked out that it's shockingly close to the FR green that Pico use on these. So I've mixed in a little drop of cream and dry brushed the mix on. Obviously some green will get onto the numbers, but as it's acrylic, a damp cotton bud will do a sound job of removing the paint. The black surfaces also need toning down, so I'm going over them with a black acrylic poster paint. This dries really matte and looks great on frames and the like. Black also needs to be added over the moulded grab handles. The other detail to add here is the gold doorknobs. Ah yes, right on schedule, Puff's back. I'm not sure why she only appears when I get the paint out, but I've spent quite a lot of my time this week picking her loose furs off the stock. Note my evolved technique of holding her back with just one finger. This isn't my first rodeo, kid. At this point I decided to give the van a full black enamel wash. It looks super dark going on, but it won't really look like that when it's dried. Moving on to the coach, and the same method is employed. You can see the worn look on the coach panels works really well as they're so smooth. The ends on this coach are red, so a red oxide acrylic is used to do the same thing as the green. I also thought I'd add a bit of interest on the ends and paint the vacuum hoses with a cream. Oh, and you can see the interior received a black wash as well, which actually gave the panels a kind of real 3D look. Happy accident. The van and coach are both put back together and the roof sprayed with grey primer, and finished off with a thin black wash. I tend to continue to add fresh water from the centre to get the look of dirt and grime collecting on the lower areas. And onto the engine. This is Alice. She's a quarry Hunslet, works at B&M and spends most of her free time looking for discounted houseplants. Sorry, I keep doing that. The model needs a few details adding, and it comes with two sizes of dumb buffers. The smaller are more practical for running, but the larger look better, so I went with the latter. It also comes with a couple of little plastic tools, so those are glued on as well. In hindsight, I probably should have painted these before gluing them in, but there we go. I do like the tiny coal shovel, very cute. The loco has printed plates on as standard, but Bachmann have been super nice and sent etched replacement plates as well, so clearly I'll use these. For some reason I forgot to use glue and glaze here and battled them with super glue, which took longer than it should. The footplate was painted black, which dulls down the shiny plastic finish from the factory. I really wasn't sure how to approach the weathering on this loco, as it's crying out for a full work-beaten look, but in theory the layout is preservation area if it's doing Santa specials. So instead of having fun, I just did a boring black wash. And even this was 99% removed by the time I'd finished fiddling around with it. Being acrylic, the classic method of washing it off with fresh water is used. The finish didn't quite work out after this wash, so I went at it with an enamel wash as well. My method for this is to apply it around all the details and edges, and then go back over them with a brush loaded with fresh IPA. What this will do is act like you're washing or cleaning the engine, and the black will pull around the details and parts that you would normally miss if it was a quick pit stop clean. Oh, and of course the engine needs actual coal. It's got a moulded load from the factory, but this literally never looks good. The coal bits are set in place with ballast bond and left to dry. I purposely glued a few bits on the footplate in front of the bunker where you expect to see it falling off. Okay, so that's going to be time up this week. For those of you who know me personally, you'll appreciate how busy I am at the moment, so getting these updates done weekly is really tough. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll grab a drink now and start the next one. I do enjoy it though. I like trains. Cheers.